The sound of chains echoed through the marble halls of Epictetus' villa, a Roman palace filled with luxury, cruelty, and secrets. In the dim light of the servants' quarters, a young slave sat silently, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle, his face calm as stone. His name was Epictetus, and he was born into slavery. But in time, this broken man would speak words that even emperors would whisper in awe. Rome was at its height, its legions invincible, its emperors treated as gods. Yet beneath the golden streets of power lived millions like Epictetus, men and women whose names were never recorded, whose pain was never sung. They served, they obeyed, they suffered, and they were forgotten. But not him, for from his chains would rise an idea so powerful, so subversive, that it would threaten the very soul of empire. That freedom is not something given by masters, but something no man can ever take away. Epictetus was born around 50 CE in Hierapolis, a city in Phrygia, under Roman rule. He never knew his father, and his mother was enslaved. As a boy, he was sold to Epictetus, a wealthy secretary to Emperor Nero, a man known for cruelty disguised as elegance. Epictetus grew up surrounded by opulence he could never touch. Silk curtains, gold goblets, the laughter of masters echoing above him like thunder. But he learned to listen, not to words, but to silence. The silence between commands. The silence after pain. The silence where truth hides. One night, Nero summoned Epictetus to his palace for sport. The emperor, drunk and unpredictable, ordered Epictetus to bring a clever slave to amuse him. Epictetus brought Epictetus, a quiet, thoughtful servant known for his strange calmness under abuse. Nero, smirking, pointed to the boy's leg. "I hear you walk with a limp," he said. "Let us see how much pain it can bear." Epictetus, desperate to please, twisted Epictetus's leg as the court laughed. Bone cracked. The boy gasped, but did not scream. Instead, he looked at his master and said softly, "If you continue, you will break it." And when the bone snapped, he added, calmly, almost kindly, "There you see. I told you so." Nero's laughter stopped. The room fell silent. The emperor stared at the boy as if seeing something unnatural, a man who had pain but not fear. That night, Nero released him back to Epictetus, saying, "Keep that one. He's not a man. He's something else." But in truth, what Nero had seen was not madness. It was philosophy, an idea that would one day destroy the illusion of power itself. Years later, as Epictetus continued serving Rome's most dangerous rulers, Epictetus remained a slave in his house. He swept the floors, tended the fires, fetched scrolls for his master's guests, many of whom were philosophers. And it was among those scrolls that he discovered the words of Socrates, Zeno, and Diogenes the Cynic. He read about men who had defied kings with nothing but truth, men who claimed that freedom begins in the mind. He began to meditate, even while chained. He trained his thoughts as others trained their bodies. He realized something shocking. No one can enslave a man's will, only his body. This, he whispered to himself, is the secret Rome will never understand. One evening, while tending the lamps in the garden, Epictetus was caught murmuring those forbidden ideas. Epictetus overheard him and asked mockingly, "You speak of freedom, yet you are a slave. What freedom can you possibly have?" Epictetus looked up, the firelight glinting in his eyes. "The freedom not to hate you." It was not rebellion. It was worse. It was indifference. And that, in the world of Rome, was the most dangerous act of all, because Rome ruled by fear. And fear, Epictetus realized, only works on those who have something left to lose. As the empire burned under Nero's madness, Epictetus' master grew paranoid. Rumors spread of secret meetings, of slaves whispering about equality and virtue. But Epictetus spoke not of revolt, only of reason. To other slaves he said, "You are free the moment you accept what you cannot control." Those words, whispered in the dark, spread like wildfire through the kitchens and cellars of Rome. A philosophy was being born, not of marble and scrolls, but of chains and courage. And soon, Epictetus would meet the man who would teach him how to turn that spark into a flame. The Stoic scholar Musonius Rufus, a teacher exiled for speaking truth to tyrants. Their meeting would change history and transform a broken slave into the philosopher who would one day teach emperors. When Rome burned, Nero blamed the Christians, the philosophers, the dreamers, anyone who dared to think differently. Amidst the chaos, soldiers dragged one man through the streets. Musonius Rufus, a Stoic teacher accused of corrupting the youth with ideas of virtue. But even in exile, Musonius' legend grew. He taught that philosophy wasn't about grand words or temple debates. It was about living well, even in chains. And one night, years after Nero's fall, a limping young slave appeared at his doorstep, asking to be taught. His name was Epictetus. Musonius looked at him with cautious eyes. "You're a slave," he said. "Your master allows this?" Epictetus bowed slightly. "He allows me to breathe. The rest, I decide." The old philosopher smiled. That was enough. Under the cold winds of exile, the slave and the sage began a journey that would reshape the meaning of freedom. Musonius taught him that virtue, not wealth, not birth, not even liberty, was the only true good. He said, "It is not the chain that enslaves a man, but the fear of it." Epictetus listened. Every lesson carved into his mind like words on stone. He learned that a Stoic must control only what lies within his power, his thoughts, choices, and actions, and surrender all else to nature's order. Everything else, pain, fortune, reputation, was beyond one's control and therefore meaningless. And in this truth, the slave found his first taste of real freedom. But philosophy was dangerous in Rome. The empire's power thrived on emotion, anger, desire, fear. A man without fear could not be ruled. Soon, whispers spread that Epictetus was no ordinary slave. In the evenings, servants and citizens gathered in the corners of markets and bathhouses to hear him speak quietly of Stoic truth. "Wealth is not having many possessions," he told them, "but needing few. You may fetter my leg, but not my will." These sayings became dangerous currency. They undermined everything Rome stood for. Epictetus grew uneasy. He had seen slaves beaten to death for less. He warned his servant, "Philosophy won't save you from the whip." Epictetus simply replied, "It saves me from needing to be saved." Years passed. Nero died, and new emperors rose, each promising freedom but fearing wisdom. Under Domitian, philosophy itself was outlawed. The emperor declared that teachers like Musonius Rufus were enemies of Rome, spreading rebellion under the mask of reason. Epictetus' master panicked. He freed his slave, not out of mercy, but fear, hoping to distance himself from suspicion. And so, after years of bondage, Epictetus stood beneath the Roman sun as a free man. But he did not rejoice. He simply said, "I was never a slave." For the Stoics, freedom was not signed on parchment. It was forged in pain, humility, and reason. Now free, he sought out Musonius once again. The old teacher, frail and scarred by exile, greeted him with a knowing smile. "So, you have learned," Musonius said. "What will you do with this freedom you always claimed to have?" Epictetus looked toward the horizon. "Teach others what cannot be taken from them." And so he did. He returned to Rome, no longer a servant, but a philosopher. There, he opened a small school of Stoicism, gathering students from all walks of life, soldiers, merchants, even senators disguised as commoners. They came not to be entertained, but to be transformed. His lectures were raw, direct, and often brutal. He mocked those who sought comfort. "You want peace," he told them. "Then stop fighting the universe." He warned against pride. "You are an actor in a play," Epictetus would say. "The role is given by God. Play it well, whether it be as a beggar or a king." His school became a refuge for restless souls in a restless empire. But Rome's rulers do not tolerate men who teach others how to live without fear. Soon, word reached Emperor Domitian himself. "There is a philosopher in the city," his informants whispered, "who teaches men that emperors hold no power over the soul." Domitian ordered his exile, along with every other philosopher in the capital. But exile was nothing new to Epictetus. He simply packed his cloak, his lamp, and a handful of scrolls, and set off toward Nicopolis, a lonely Greek city by the sea. There, he would build something the empire could never silence, a school that taught the art of inner freedom, hidden in plain sight. Epictetus had escaped the whip and the palace. But now, far from Rome, he would face his greatest trial yet, the temptation of peace itself. Could a man born in pain truly live in tranquility? Or was suffering the very forge of wisdom? The answer would come from the sea, and from a meeting that would test his philosophy to its core. The air of Nicopolis was salt and silence. The cries of gulls replaced the roar of Roman crowds, and for the first time in his life, Epictetus lived without the sound of chains. In a modest stone house overlooking the sea, he opened a small school, not adorned with columns or statues, but with humility. There were no marble seats, no inscriptions, only a wooden bench, a lamp, and the mind of a man who had nothing left to lose. And yet, from this humble place, his words would reach emperors, generals, and centuries beyond his death. Students began arriving from every corner of the empire. They expected eloquence, comfort, perhaps a few philosophical pleasantries. But Epictetus offered them none. He began each lesson with a single question. Tell me, what troubles you? One student complained of losing his wealth, another of heartbreak, a third of fear before war. Epictetus listened patiently, then said, You suffer not because things happen, but because you judge them to be evil. He taught that the world is not cruel. Our minds make it so. The same storm that drowns a sailor also carries another safely to shore. What matters is not the wind, but how one sets the sail. To those who envied power, he said, Would you be emperor? Then learn to rule yourself first. To those who feared death, he replied, You fear what all men must face. It is not death that frightens you, but your opinion of it. His teachings spread quietly, carried by his disciples, especially Arian, a young Roman noble fascinated by his master's unshakable calm. Arian began recording his words secretly, fearing they might one day be lost. Those writings would survive as the discourses, the very foundation of Stoic philosophy as the world knows it. But Epictetus was not a gentle teacher. He ridiculed students who came seeking comfort instead of transformation. Once, when a wealthy man asked how to gain peace of mind, Epictetus laughed softly. Peace, he said. You come here dressed in silk, carrying gold, and ask for peace. You want peace, but you refuse to give up your battle with desire. Then he pointed to a beggar outside his school. He has peace. You have luxury. Who is richer? For Epictetus, freedom was not the absence of pain, but the mastery of it. He lived this truth. His leg, permanently crippled, reminded him daily of cruelty endured. Yet, he never once cursed his past. To his students, he said, The gods gave you everything you need to be free, your will, your reason, your courage. Use them, or remain a slave forever, no matter what name you bear. And as the empire grew more corrupt, as emperors fell to paranoia and madness, Epictetus' school became a refuge for the sane, a secret sanctuary for those seeking a different kind of power. One cold evening, a messenger arrived from Rome. He bore a seal, imperial. Epictetus broke it open and read silently. A Roman officer stood waiting outside. After a long pause, the philosopher smiled faintly. The gods have a sense of irony, he murmured. The letter bore the name of Hadrian, the soon-to-be emperor of Rome. He had heard of the philosopher in exile, the slave who preached virtue, and he wanted to meet him. His students were terrified. Master, you cannot trust an emperor, they said. Philosophers die for less. But Epictetus only replied, If it is my fate to meet him, then I shall meet him. If it is my fate to die, then I shall die. Either way, my part is to act with courage. When Emperor Hadrian arrived in Nicopolis, he found no court, no servants, no ceremony, only an old man with a limp sitting by a modest fire. Hadrian, curious, asked, They say you are a free man, yet you own nothing. They say you are happy, yet you have lost everything. Tell me, philosopher, what do you possess that I do not? Epictetus looked at him calmly. A mind that cannot be taken, a soul that does not beg, and peace that does not depend on your empire. Hadrian said nothing for a long time. Then, finally, he bowed his head slightly and whispered, "Then perhaps you are freer than Rome itself." The meeting ended without punishment, without gifts, only mutual understanding. But it marked the beginning of something extraordinary. The emperor himself became a student of Stoicism, paving the way for another, Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king who would one day rule the world with Epictetus' teachings echoing in his mind. Yet for Epictetus, the meeting meant nothing more than another reminder of fate's strange humor. The gods send kings to test philosophers, he told his students, and philosophers to test kings. But as his fame grew, something else began to stir, a quiet danger. Some said Epictetus possessed forbidden knowledge, that his calm came from communion with divine powers. Others whispered that he practiced magic, that no mortal could bear such serenity. He denied it all. Yet, deep inside, even he sometimes wondered, was this peace truly Stoic reason, or something beyond the reach of philosophy? The answer would come not from kings or scrolls, but from a night when his beliefs would be tested against the one force he could not reason with, love. It was winter in Nicopolis. The sea howled, and the philosopher's lamp flickered in the cold. Epictetus, now gray and frail, still taught daily. He lived as he always had, owning nothing, fearing nothing, and wanting nothing. But one evening, fate knocked gently on his door. A neighbor arrived, clutching a newborn child. The mother had died giving birth. The father had vanished. "Please," she begged, "you are wise and kind. The baby will die if no one takes him." Epictetus stared at the tiny life in her arms, fragile, helpless, crying. He had preached all his life that attachments lead to suffering, that one must never cling to what the world can take away. But as he looked at the infant, he hesitated. For the first time, philosophy met its greatest opponent, human love. He took the child, and to care for him, he allowed a woman, a freed servant, to live in his house. Her name was Domthea. She was practical, sharp, and unafraid to speak her mind. She challenged him in ways his students never dared. "You speak of freedom, old man," she told him, "but now you are bound to this child." "Perhaps," Epictetus replied, "but this bond was chosen freely." And so began the most paradoxical chapter of his life. The philosopher who renounced attachment, now raising a child. His students were astonished. "Master," one asked, "have you not broken your own rule?" Epictetus smiled. "No, I have not claimed to be a god, only a man. Philosophy is not about never feeling, but never being ruled by what you feel." He fed the child, mended the fire, and lectured as the infant slept beside him. It was a strange, tender sight, the stern Stoic, cradled beside his chair, dictating truths about detachment and destiny. Yet beneath that calm exterior, something stirred. He began to dream of the past, of the pain, of chains long gone but never forgotten. He realized that freedom, if it was real, must survive not only suffering but also love. And this was the final test. One day, Domthea found him sitting silently by the cradle. "What troubles you?" she asked. "I have taught that all things must pass," he whispered, "but I fear what will happen when this child does." Domthea placed her hand on his. "Then perhaps the gods sent him not to test your strength, but to teach you mercy." Her words struck him deeper than any philosophical debate. Mercy, the one virtue his teachings had always overlooked. For Stoicism had taught him to endure life, but now, through love, he was learning to embrace it. Years passed. The boy grew, and so did Epictetus' renown. Scholars traveled across the empire to sit in his humble room and listen. He spoke less now, more gently, as if aware that wisdom was not found in clever words but in quiet understanding. "Do not seek to escape suffering," he told them. "Seek to understand it. Do not chase happiness. It will find you when you stop running from pain." And then, one evening, he said something that stunned his disciples. "Freedom without compassion is emptiness." The wise man must feel, but never fall. But peace is fragile, and the world loves to test it. Rumors reached Nicopolis that Domitian's successors were once again tightening control, hunting philosophers accused of influencing rebellion. Epictetus was old now, too weak to flee again. One night, soldiers arrived. They searched his home, overturning scrolls, demanding hidden writings. The boy clung to Domithea, terrified. Epictetus, calm as ever, said only, "Do what you must. The gods have already decided the rest." They found nothing treasonous, only his notes, his teachings, and a small wooden figure of the child's mother. Before leaving, one soldier asked mockingly, "You still believe you're free, old man?" Epictetus smiled faintly. "More than you." And with that, the soldiers departed, leaving behind the man who had once been a slave, now freer than the empire that ruled the world. In the months that followed, his health declined, but his spirit never dimmed. He continued teaching until the very end, dictating to Arion, who wrote tirelessly beside his bed. "Remember," Epictetus said in his final winter, "you control only your will. If your body breaks, let it. If your possessions vanish, let them. But never let your reason and your kindness leave you, for those are divine." That night, as the sea murmured outside, he passed quietly. No gold, no tomb, no tears. Only peace. And in that silence, the lesson of his life became eternal. A man may be born a slave, but the soul that rules itself is untouchable. When the old philosopher's breath faded into the sea wind, Nicopolis fell silent. No statues were built, no poets sang his name. And yet, far away in Rome, his words began to stir the conscience of a new generation, men who ruled the world but could not rule themselves. Among them was one who would become the most powerful man on earth, Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor. Decades after Epictetus' death, a young Marcus sat in his study by candlelight, reading the discourses, those simple conversations once spoken in a poor man's room by the sea. The words hit him with the force of revelation. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. He whispered the line over and over again. Epictetus, the crippled slave, had reached into the heart of an emperor. And through that connection, the ideas of freedom, virtue, and self-mastery would pass from the lowest chain to the highest throne. Marcus Aurelius later wrote in his Meditations, "From Epictetus, I learned that the will can stand firm against fate." In those words, the legacy of a slave lived on, quiet, indestructible, eternal. The Roman Empire had conquered the known world, but even its legions could not conquer the mind of one man who refused to kneel. Arion, faithful disciple of Epictetus, preserved his teacher's wisdom in the Discourses and Enchiridion. When asked why he had written them, he said, "Because Rome will forget the sound of chains, but it must never forget the sound of freedom." And indeed, centuries later, when Rome crumbled and kings fell, the words of the former slaves survived. They crossed deserts, monasteries, and empires. They reached Renaissance scholars, Enlightenment thinkers, and even modern revolutionaries, all drawn to the same idea. No man is truly free unless he owns himself. Epictetus' teachings outlived emperors. He taught that reason was divine, that virtue was victory, and that every human being, no matter their chains, had the power to rise above circumstance. It was not rebellion, it was revelation. And it was more dangerous than any army, because Rome could enslave bodies, but it could not enslave minds. Imagine, now, the old philosopher standing before the sea once more. No crown, no robe, no chain, only calm. He has lost everything the world calls valuable, but gained the one thing that gods themselves envy, a free soul. His life whispers through the centuries, "Do not waste your suffering." It is the teacher the gods sent to show you what cannot die. And perhaps that is the final, forbidden lesson of Epictetus, that freedom was never about breaking chains or escaping masters. It was about mastering the self, so that even in the darkest prison, the soul remains untamed, unbroken, and eternal. As long as you desire nothing, he once said, you are richer than kings. The story of Epictetus ends not with his death, but with a question, one that still haunts every age. If a slave could be free in his mind, what excuse do we, the free, still have for our chains?